Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this meeting of the School Transition Reopening and Restart Task Force. We are glad that you have joined us. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, but thank you as well to all of the members of the task force who've joined us and the many members of the various work groups who have spent so much time working on this. We thank you for it, and we thank you for all of your hard work that you have put into this project. For today, you want to just advance one slide? For today, our task is really to finish up the work that we started in our last meeting. That means reviewing recommendations from the work groups and proposing final recommendations that will move forward. In our last meeting, we were able to focus on the first 5 recommendations. So in this meeting, our hope is that we will be able to work through the remaining 6 recommendations. And toward that end, we will actually start with number 6. And then if we have time at the end, we can just recap and look at all of the various recommendations that we've got going. I want to just contextualize the work that we're doing here again. It is the task force kind of came together with the idea of creating some recommendations to present to the governor, to the Department of Education, and to school leaders. And we so appreciate all of the work that they put into it. And I know that school leaders across the state are actively formulating their plans for September. And so these recommendations and the further granularity that we add to these in the future will give them some resources to work toward that end. So I think most of you are familiar at this point in time with how to engage in the conversation. You can either put something in the chat, you can engage verbally, or if you want, you can jump onto one of the video slots that we have. We do ask that if you jump in to do a video, and actually it worked pretty well last time, if you just like cue yourselves up in the video, then Ellen's able to call on you to respond to the various questions. Once you have had an opportunity to share your content or ask your question or participate in however you're going to do that, if you drop off of the video feed to allow another person to take a place in that queue, that is helpful. And with that said, just do a couple of table setting slides that we've got going on here. We can advance one more and remind ourselves of who it is that's participating, remembering that these are individuals who are really just representatives across a much larger work group, as well as all of the surveys that we receive back from parents and teachers and instructional leaders across the state. And these work groups included instruction and student wellness and operations and technologies and students, and really some cross-cutting work done by the associations. And so again, appreciate their work, appreciate their contribution to what we've got going on here. On the next slide, we will see where we are in terms of our original plan. We continue to move forward with that, and as we approach the end of the work, I want to again acknowledge the hard work that's gone into this and my appreciation for all of the contributions that have been made. Today we're at June 29th, and we are going to finish up some draft recommendations so that we can present those to the governor. So on the next slide, what I really want to do is just outline kind of where we are. On June 30th, we will be delivering high-level recommendations to Governor Sununu, to the department, to you, some of you who are on this call as school leaders. These are the recommendations that have really bubbled up from the work groups who have been laboring through this, and as they've been distilling some of the work from the survey that we put out there. I want to continue to acknowledge in our last meeting, we had several slides that talked about some of the tensions that were coming up through the information in terms of wanting to return, but wanting to balance that with appropriate safety protocols, in terms of how to do that in a way that is both responsible and effective for all of the individuals in our system. And what we've really been working towards is what I refer to as a best fit in terms of these tensions, trying to recognize that we won't necessarily be able to find an answer or a solution that solves everyone's concerns, but doing everything we can to try and find a pathway for everyone to succeed. One of the other aspects that we emphasized in our last meeting that I think is really important is to recognize when we look at statistics that there are individuals behind all these statistics, whether those are students or families or teachers who have various circumstances which they come to school and the learning environment from. And we want to make sure that we're able to respect all of those various individuals as they engage this system. I think as well, it's important for us to acknowledge that these recommendations are a living document. And as new information evolves, we will continue to monitor the circumstances in the state of New Hampshire. We will work closely with HHS. We will monitor information from CDC as well as any other healthcare professionals and may update this guidance throughout the process. We have all seen in the last week some of the developments in other states that believed that they were in a certain position in terms of moving forward and the opening of their states and have now had to backtrack a little bit. The success that we've had here in New Hampshire is a testament to the quality of the people in New Hampshire, and the work that we're doing here is a testament to the quality of all of you who have contributed to that. So the guidance we will continue to update as we need, but we need to keep in mind that circumstances can change over the summer and then even into the school year once we get going, and we want to just be cognizant of that. I also want to talk a little bit about what's next up for the work that we're doing with AIR. And first is taking these high-level recommendations and drilling down on those. So we will put texture onto each of these recommendations from all of the information that we've gotten from the work groups. There was a lot of really productive and engaging conversation at those work groups that talked about the how-to, some really granular level stuff. And so what we will do is connect up all of that content to these higher level recommendations to make it as usable as we can for our school leaders as they move forward. I think as well, we talked about early on in the process doing another survey for our community members. We had great results from that initial survey, and we want to continue to reach out to our broader communities. Maybe there are individuals who don't have students in the system, they're not teachers, they're not school leaders, but they still want to weigh in on what September will look like for our children in our school system. We will also work towards the release of all of our survey results. We have some preliminary looks at that. Now we're trying to find out how we can embed that into some technology to make that ubiquitously available vis-a-vis the web for everyone to be able to gain access to that feedback that we've received from our communities, really valuable feedback. And as well, we've not yet dug into the analysis of the open-ended survey results that we got, and we will take time during this month to look at that heuristic information and understand how that affects the work and what school will look like. As you can imagine, with 56,000 response, there's a lot of open-ended question results that need some analysis. And so we are gonna next up start working on that. So with that said, I will hand this over to Ellen and we will begin our work on our recommendations.
Great, thank you, Commissioner, and thank you all the task force members. So we are going to engage in a conversation that's very similar to what we engaged in last week. We would love to provide or receive some final considerations, recommendations, guidance that you would like to see as part of these recommendations that will be put forth. And broadly, if you recall, after our meeting last week, we had sent out a survey sort of collecting some of this information in advance of today's meeting. We knew the conversation for this task force ended today, at least for this first phase of the work, and so wanted to come prepared for today's discussion with some initial thinking from your colleagues on the task force about what type of guidance or revisions they would like to see for the recommendations 6 through 10. So what you'll see on the next set of slides are sort of a compilation of that feedback that we received from task force members late last week. We'd like to go through those items and see if there's anything that is still unclear or is missing or is potentially unintentionally problematic for the recommendations that are being put forth. And then sort of receive a final thumbs up from the task force members about the recommendations and sort of sub actions within those recommendations. for moving forward with this work. Similar to the conversation last week, it would be great if you could have that crosswalk document that we shared with task force members that crosswalked the recommendations from each of the work groups with these recommendations that will go through as a group. The other just sort of formatting or sort of orientation to these next set of slides, you'll see the recommendation as the title of the slide. You'll see the specific sub-actions that are in that crosswalk document. And then the text in green is the feedback that we received from the task force members. And then in some of the sort of sub-actions, sub-recommendations, you'll see a red font. Those are changes that we've made to the recommendations based on the feedback as well, but we wanted to sort of highlight any changes that you might have from the document that you received last week and what you're seeing on the slides today. So with that, I already mentioned, but we're going to start with 6 through 10, and then if we have time in today's discussion, just sort of re-review 1 through 5 and just make sure everything is clear for everybody. So with that, I'm going to open up the conversation. Would love for the task force members to jump on the call if you want to speak and sort of use your video so that we know that you're ready to speak. But starting with recommendation number 6, which focuses on reviewing transportation policies and protocols. We sort of had 2 sub-actions within that document. The first was to revise transportation plans to emphasize safety. And then the second one is to plan for possible driver, PPE, or transportation equipment shortages, since many drivers are in an at-risk category based on age. Again, the green language right there is some of the feedback that we've already received. Again, either considerations, potential clarifications, or revisions that they would like to see, but would love to open it up to folks who didn't have a chance to weigh in on the survey or folks who would like to add anything to this feedback.
Always difficult to get the first one. So.
Yeah, I would say relatedly, if people are fine with these changes and you know, you have nothing that you'd like to add and you're ready to give it the thumbs up, feel free to do that. So, all right, Phil, thanks for jumping in.
Thank you, Phil.
Happy to break the ice. All right. So thank you for adding the clarification around the like what it is when we say equipment, because equipment like is a pretty broad category, right? I do, when it says need more personnel, I assume that means personnel to ensure social distance and PPE. There's a presupposition of that of social distancing on the buses. And there's also a presupposition of that there is going to be, if social distancing is required, we're going to have all children going every day to school as opposed to like maybe hybrid, right? So I think that statement, while it's potentially accurate in a very specific situation, is not necessarily something that's accurate across all of the situations. I don't know if you want me to comment on the green or the blue and the red only.
Nope, all of it is open for discussion.
Okay. I should have said that before I made my comment on the green, but
But bearing in mind though, Phil, like the green is the feedback that we got from folks when we put out that Google document, as opposed to the blue text and the red text are really the recommendation and sub-recommendations that will go forward.
So then I would say, I will talk to the blue text and A, revise transportation plans to emphasize safety. That seems super broad, right? Like I think it's like safety, like around this situation, right? Like I think that I'm assuming the transportation plans right now are all emphasizing safety. It's just this is a very specific subset of safety that maybe we want to call out.
Okay. Do you have any, I know we're not wordsmithing, but any language that you would like to see in there, or?
Not off the I was not prepared to wordsmith it. It was more
That's
of a,
okay.
but I do think that like just something that,
Yeah, I think your point is that we got to create nexus to the COVID-19 issue because safety is a broad topic.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe it would be not even emphasize safety, but incorporate safety around COVID-19. Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead, Phil, just finish that sentence. I'm not sure that got on the record, and then we'll jump over to Keith.
Yep. So maybe instead of revised transportation plans to emphasize safety, it's like revised transportation plans to incorporate safety around like COVID-19 or maybe even a more general pandemic like type comment. So it's generalizable past this situation.
Okay. Thank you. I'm not sure. Keith, are you up next?
Yeah, hey guys. So I'm just looking at the first bullet under B. I think that's supposed to be personnel, right? We'll
Yep.
need more personnel to ensure social distance. So I just want to know, like, are we recommending that there's an additional person other than the bus driver on each bus to kind of ensure that the kids socially distance, wear masks, and whatnot? Because if that doesn't happen, obviously we can't expect a bus driver to be monitoring social distancing on a bus and policing that. But if that doesn't happen, if the kids aren't wearing masks and whatnot on the bus, then really it would be all for naught, right? You'd get to the school and all those precautions will have already been broken. So I think it's probably important that maybe we figure out a way financially to allow districts to allow another adult on each bus. I don't know what other people feel about that.
So I do think, just for clarification, particularly for the first two bullets, I think these were in reference to what considerations might district leaders need to make related to this recommendation. And so I think to Phil's earlier point, if your district adopts a certain social distancing policy or mask wearing policy, then considerations that you made on that recommendation would then fall into considerations for how you're dealing with transportation policies and protocols. So in that sense, that's how I read that feedback, which is, if we do this, then we'll have to think about it on this side. And I think that sort of feeds into that third bullet as well around, considerations around financial needs should the first two be adopted or considered for a district leader.
So I just have a couple clarifying questions and a bit to add to the bottom bullet point on the slide. So firstly, for part B, I was wondering if to clarify, are we recommending or requiring bus drivers to wear PPE?
So I defer to the commissioner on this, but I would assume it's similar to all of our other recommendations, which are district leaders have the flexibility to adopt the policy that would best suit their particular context based on a set of criteria that's already been shared in previous recommendations.
Okay, so the second thing to that last bullet point there, I know from all the buses I've ever been on, there's oftentimes 2 to 3 people per seat on the row in the buses. So if we're going to do a strategy where we extend drop off and pick up, you're going to have a lot of kids who are waiting at the school to be picked up or dropped off for a lot longer. So I think this kind of feeds into providing lunch and stuff, which we do. We're going to have to figure out how are we going to get these kids to do something other than, I don't know, mess around or cause problems. So, I don't know, homework, letting them be outside. I'm thinking particularly of elementary students here. And also if there's students in need, is it going to be so late that we're going to have to be concerned about feeding them because they're waiting for that bus?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ben. So thinking about the implications for students that are waiting on it for a staggered schedule. Hey, Steve.
Hello. One of the things that I've been thinking about as we've been doing our work is anytime that health is mentioned or safety, what I'm wondering is if the recommendation should really default to something like follow the recommendations of state and local health and or medical officials. Because I think this is all changing so quickly that whatever we may recommend today could be outmoded in a week. And I think the other thing is looking at it from the perspective of school leaders. If we were to say that it's up to the local entities to make those decisions, that makes it really hard for a school leader to say, well, we really need to follow what doctors and scientists and so forth are telling us. And you know, I think the power of this body is fairly limited, and I just think it would be important if we were to say there are established safety and health protocols, and anything basically in these in each of these items, whether it's number 1, 3, 6, or whatever, if it relates to health, that we say follow what the experts are telling us, and then you can make your local decisions based on that. I understand there's got to be wiggle room. So that's my 2 cents.
So within each of these recommendations, if there is guidance, for example, from the governor or from New Hampshire Health and Human Services, which I think one of the recommendations says, you know, you must follow these, and then you are also I forget the language, but you know, encouraged to follow CDC guidelines as well. If there are explicit guidance that relate to any of these recommendations, that we include that within there to say, you know, pull it out and say this is the recommendation from these health agencies around this, or these are considerations given by these agencies. Is that what you're saying?
I think that would be very helpful to say these are the recommendations as of 6:30, but you know, please look to your local or state level officials for more information. And back to the point before, revised transportation plans to emphasize safety. And we want to add something about, really, this is about COVID-19 and not about seatbelts and other things. But when we make a broad statement like that, if we're going to add COVID-19 to the sentence or to the statement, shouldn't there also be the addition of and following established safety protocols, so forth?
Okay. Thank you. Phil?
So to that point, I do want to reiterate a conversation that was had last week around this, around the balancing of physical safety and psychological safety. That part, I think, of the way we crafted recommendations or provided feedback to recommendations last week was to make sure that we were considering the impact on children of what some of the physical safety measures would be, so that if we went straight with just listen to what the physical, like what a specific set of doctors or scientists are saying are required, without the balance of, okay, what's the impact going to be on the development of a child's social emotional health, and then filtering it through that lens, I think it might be providing a situation where we're balancing, like there's two components of the child's safety and we're looking very heavily on one, and I think we need to find some balance between the two. I feel like that's our charge, right? Like to make sure that it's not just feeding directly from HHS to schools, but that it's filtered through something that's thinking about, okay, what is the psychological impact on the child?
But I would still maintain that HHS would drive a lot of this, and certainly there needs to be attention paid to the social emotional well-being. But if they're ever at odds, is it better to be err on the side of safety for children versus you know, children not wanting to wear a mask? That's my concern. So I understand the point, but I think then we need to perhaps ask health officials, well, what about age appropriate measures, so that it isn't a broad blanket.
Phil, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's beyond just saying like if a child doesn't want to wear a mask, right? It's a school or a district deciding, okay, like here's what the health recommendations are based on the current conditions inside of our very local space. What do we feel comfortable doing, balancing, like implementing that versus the psychological safety of the child, right? And like, do they say we just don't want to, like maybe it's it's turned into a hotspot, and they just don't want to even send the children back to school based on the safety measures that will be required to do that safely. So I'm not saying discount the safety. It's more of like, look at the safety requirements necessary for the current conditions of the local landscape, and then filter it through what is the implications, social, psychological, for those children, to make the decision as to, okay, where do we go? Or what do we do? That's sort of my take.
Yeah, and
I
it
like
seems
the
like,
example you used. I'm sorry. I like the example you used. I would totally agree with that. Thank you.
okay. Yeah, and it seems like some upfront framing of this, for all of these recommendations, sort of that balance of health and safety and social emotional well-being of students is an important sort of structure to start any of these recommendations with, and sort of maybe providing a little more detail around what that could entail in the example that you just shared, Phil, I think would be really helpful for leaders to sort of think through that lens. And we can still sort of, like I said, include when explicitly available the guidance for any of the recommendations that are being provided, not as requirements, but rather as information that's easily accessible to those making those decisions. So besides the feedback that we've received already, is there anything else from task force members around this recommendation that we should discuss, or generally, with these additional additions as well as the information on the slides, we are good to go? And I'll take silence as an okay to move on. And I'm going to move us on anyway, because we've got 4 more to go. Okay, so recommendation 7 focused specifically on planning for school meal delivery. And so within this broader recommendation, we had 3 sort of sub recommendations, which is considering adjusted schedules to reduce numbers in cafeteria. If meals are being moved to the classroom, to have a plan for students with food allergies, and then plan to accommodate meals for those who are not attending on-site school. One quick note, we did switch the order of 2 of these. So we switched the order of A and B. So if you're looking at your document, that was some feedback that we received, sort of thinking through the order was important, and it was suggested that we reorder. So thoughts or feedback on some of the comments that your colleagues have already received or already given, or new items for consideration? Keith.
Yeah, so I think it totally makes sense to use classrooms, for students to eat, try to space them out more. Something was just brought to my attention last night. In some states, they're actually New Hampshire as well, but districts are having teachers sign waivers saying that, they will not get a lunch time without students in the room. And I just think we need to be cognizant, especially if a district, adopts a policy that masks will be worn by staff. You're going to need a break in your day. Teachers are going to need a break where they can take that mask off. Some of these waivers that were being discussed also, said that prep time is going to be, completely up to the district. So that scares me a little bit for the teachers out there, that we need to look out for their social emotional well-being as well. So I don't know, I don't see anything in here about the specifics. I would hate for some districts to not, or to force teachers into not getting breaks that they need. So that's a concern.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Keith. As you were just saying that, part of me is wondering if that's something that belongs under this one, or something that, I forget which number it is, but we have one that focuses on staffing implications and staffing decisions. And I'm just wondering if examples or considerations under that recommendation would feed into this one as well, or if you think it should be something.
Yeah, I completely agree. It could be coming up, honestly. I just, it was specifically mentioned, lunchtime for teachers in some of the waivers and planning time. So it could go later. You could be right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Hey, Aaron.
Hi, something that I actually just thought of that kind of goes hand in hand with lunchtime is use of facilities. In our school, we're a smaller school, so considering, I don't even know how to word it, but just making sure that somewhere in there we have a consideration for how students will be able to come and go, whether they're washing their hands or going to the bathroom. That kind of stuff tends to be held off until around lunchtime or things like that. So it's going to be really high traffic. And when I think of our school, we have one long hallway, 3 or 4, 5, and 6 all eat lunch at the same time, and there's really one bathroom that they're all kind of working around. So, is that going to be something that we need to be considering when we're scaffolding lunch, use of the facilities and things like that? Or maybe that's why we're spreading kids out when they're having lunch, because they're going to have one group near one bathroom and have another group near another bathroom, so it can be spread out. And then how do we monitor usage in the bathroom is kind of a scary thing to even try and wrap my head around. So just making sure that we're considering that, whether that belongs in school meal delivery or not, but the two kind of go together.
Yeah, I'm wondering for this one if something around just acknowledging sort of the planning that needs to happen for the use of the bathroom under A, because I do think the adjusted schedules might be trying to not have 4, 5, and 6 all together at the same time, but rather maybe spread them out and making sure that that is considered as well. And then I think in one of the recommendations we did have something around the use of common spaces or something that addressed, which I think the bathroom or other broader common spaces could be addressed under, and making sure that we include sort of purposeful guidance around planning the use of those or how that will be organized or maintained, I think could fit under there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think out of these, I think A would definitely be the section that that could be under. And then, thinking about what Keith was saying too, think of the staff that need to go use the facilities as well. I know many teachers that won't stop teaching and can't leave their class until that opportunity. So making sure that we do facilitate something like that, or the districts are considering it, rather would be the better way to say it.
Right. Okay, thank you. Hi, Deli. Nope, we can't hear you. No. Okay, she'll put it in the chat. That sounds good.
Okay. Oh, now I'm unmuted. Somebody unmuted me.
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. It said I was muted by the organizer. So anyway, okay. Do we need to think about maybe having bottles of hand sanitizer on all the tables where kids will be eating? I don't know. Just something to think about or consider. I'm not sure. Seems I've been seeing so many more bottles of hand sanitizer everywhere I go. So I don't know if we need to make it readily available.
I mean, in the theme of the other types of guidance we provide, I'm sure it's something we could suggest schools consider. I don't know if you're asking for something more explicit than that, Deli, or just.
I think I was just thinking of if we are going to put them at tables together, before they eat. Some of them probably won't go to the bathroom to wash their hands. Just the teacher can gently remind them, there's hand sanitizer on the table, something like that.
Okay.
It seems to be the most, important time to have clean hands, I would think, but really all times are, but that's probably my top priority. Yeah.
I would agree with that. Okay, that's definitely something that we can include as, something to consider and maybe plan for if folks decide to go with sitting in the classroom to eat lunch.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other thoughts or feedback on this one? Okay, well, if something comes up, we can always circle back to it. I'm going to move us along. So number 8 was around planning for instruction. This one is divided across 2 slides. So if you're only if you're only seeing the first two, we'll get to the other two strategies on the next slide. And just you'll see kind of actually all 4 of these sub-actions have been rewritten to provide further clarity from the feedback that we received over the last week. It seemed like we really wanted to make it clear sort of what was the difference across the 4 sub-strategies and also how they related to each other. And so for the first one, there's establish a student learning work group that's focused on instructional priorities for fall 2020. And then the second is to establish a baseline for student learning upon their return to school in fall 2020. And then you will also see some of the feedback that we received for those first 2. Aaron, I saw a comment in there from you around practices. Are you saying planning for instructional practices? Is that your feedback?
I was referring to back when we were talking about just cafeteria sanitary practices, just offering districts, consider more heavily monitor sanitary practices. That might cover more of what people were talking about.
Got it. Thank you. Hey, Ben.
I'd just like to recommend that in the student learning work group, you include students because I feel like they understand aspects of what they've learned, especially because they talk to other students more than I think parents and teachers do. So they have a different perspective. Maybe it's not quite as accurate as someone administering a test, but their sentiments, I think, are valuable in that regard.
Great, thank you, Ben. Any other feedback? Okay, we can move to the second part of planning for instruction. So part C is around develop student instruction plans that are responsive to individual student baseline data, and then establish strategies to implement and monitor student instruction plans. So here you can see, again, the feedback that we received and the revised language based on the feedback that we received.
So Ellen, when you're talking about the feedback you received, do you mean based on who went in and added more to the Google Doc? Because I was part of this group and these have really changed quite a bit from what we put in place as the instruction group. So was that altered based on people who went and did that?
Yes, so these revisions were based on the feedback that we got last week from Taskforce members. And was that who? Sorry, who is that talking?
Sorry, it's Catherine. My video won't turn on.
Okay.
Turn on. Sorry.
No problem. No problem. Just want to.
Thanks for the clarification.
Sure yeah. And this I would say changed from the red is a revised language to sort of clarify the intent that was in that crosswalk document that we put together. But if there are other pieces that you think are missing, our goal was not to cut anything out. And so please feel free to share what you think should be in there or what's missing.
Sure. Well, we talked extensively about sort of the social emotional place that kids are going to come in upon entering school in the fall, if we're entering school, and that making sure that we are valuing that piece as before we determine what assessment and instructional plans we may need to develop. So we need to develop our culture and our climate. We need to have students readjust to grouping and social groups and rules and routines and procedures. And we want to make sure that kids come in and are comfortable before we start assessing for instruction. And some of this, assessment data, of course, we talked about was really based on the curriculum. So when we're looking at recommendations for that, really focusing on curriculum-based measures to look at that as instructional data versus standardized data, which will yield information to give us formative assessment data. So I did see the whole student environment and the social emotional implications, but I think that also belongs in the assessment piece too.
Okay, so just for I just want to make sure I fully understand what you're looking for. So we did include recommendation number 4, which is around supporting student, family, and educator wellness, and that focuses on planning to support the social emotional learning, considering outreach, establishing mental health resources and partners, and then coordinating services. And then in number 9, I believe, we do talk about sort of the professional development and instructional piece around trauma responsive and social emotional learning. But I just want to make sure that you are saying that you think there should be the assessment piece under B as well there, or that it wasn't sort of fitting maybe in one of these other ones.
I think the assessment guidance needs to be broader than just sort of what data we're collecting. And so putting some recommendations in there on when to determine when you can gather a baseline is important for local school districts to consider that information. So I do think what you had in, I can't remember if it was C or D now, sorry, but on the next slide, I think that similar language can carry over throughout the whole strand. I think that's the only piece that I'm trying to highlight. Consider the whole student environment, the social emotional implications to achieve student instruction plans. And then if you put that with the assessment piece is the social emotional implications to, assess student, to conduct formative assessments, to assess student progress or whatever.
Okay, sorry, I was having a little trouble with my connection. I am going to just pause and see if others heard that okay, or if we need to ask Catherine to restate.
I heard it all right.
Okay.
Maybe Catherine, you want to just kind of repeat it in case somebody else's connection wasn't right, and that way we make sure that Ellen gets it. So I went back and pulled up last week's. We basically had evaluate student learning as that B, and so that's migrated, and maybe Catherine just add your texture around what you were thinking there. So I think there's a little bit more precise language, it sounds like.
So we had put a recommendation in there around the assessment piece, and again, looking at that student environment and the social implications before we're collecting assessment data. We'd also talked about formative assessment information versus standardized assessments. Now, I just want to make sure that we're considering the social emotional implications before we're collecting assessment data on a student. And I think that's, I guess, the primary goal of what I was trying to say. I was talking around it a bit, but what you have in D, it seems like it could be in B as well, just with the change around formative assessment information versus student instruction plans. Because I think that, again, we want to make sure kids are adjusting and transitioning before we're collecting data. If they're not comfortable, we're going to be collecting data that's not accurate. We want to make sure we get accurate data if we're going to put them through it.
Okay. And when you say what's in D, you mean that second bullet around consider the whole student environment? And yep. Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
almost,
like that.
that sounds like almost, Catherine, you're saying to the point of like, let's make sure we have a valid baseline because we
Yes.
understand the whole child before we do this, so we have good information to work off of. That makes a lot of sense.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Because if we're going to put students through collecting assessment data, I want to make sure it is valid. So we make good formative decisions around what we need to do for these kids.
Okay. Great. Thank you for clarifying and for repeating. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Any other thoughts or feedback from task force members around 8A through D? Okay. Well, we can always come back if something pops up or in other recommendations jog something in your memory. Okay, number 9 is focusing on professional development considerations. So similar to number 8, we revised these a bit to provide further clarity and also maybe remove, I think, what some folks felt was maybe too directive around a learning management system. And so for the first one, design and implement professional development on the district's learning management system and best practices for curriculum design. And then B, design and implement professional development on trauma responsive instruction and social emotional learning. So broadly, these are professional development topics that could be considered for district leaders upon returning to school. Hey, Erin.
I think this was a great revision. That was one of the things I think I commented on a lot in the survey, was kind of focusing, making sure that, you know, what the district is using already is what's continued to be using, that we're not adding more. But something else that I just thought of is maybe considering the amount of time we have for professional development. So making sure that districts are keeping their scope not too wide when they're trying to come up with a plan of how they're going to do this. So considering, you know, we're going to be giving out this recommendation to the governor in a day, and then they're going to have maybe a month and a half, a month and 3/4 to kind of come up with a plan, along with whatever other professional development was going on as well. So maybe just recommending that districts consider the amount of time they have and the scope of what they're trying to accomplish. But I think this looks really good.
Erin, can I just ask a clarifying question? So when you're saying the scope of what you're trying to accomplish, are you recommending that they sort of map out the whole scope? Is that the consideration? Is it break it down into smaller chunks across your PD? I just want to make sure that our guidance is sort of what you're suggesting.
So I was looking at that first bullet point under A, the type of learning that they're designing and like how they want to give it out. So, you know, how many different types of programs are they using in terms of scope? You know, we want to use Zoom and we want to use Google Classroom and we want to use 10 other things, and we're going to try and cram all that PD together. Just in terms of scope, what are they focusing on? Is it just that one learning management system? A lot of schools are using multiple. So I know earlier we recommended focusing on one learning management system, which I think would help reduce that scope. But just maintaining that idea that we have limited time for PD. And so keeping the focus on fewer things than kind of going in 6 different directions in terms of how we can either blend a hybrid model, e-learning, classroom instruction, like was said in that first bullet. I just don't want districts to feel like they need to come up with too many plans, basically, and have their scope be too large.
Okay, great. Thank you, Erin, for that clarification.
Vital at all.
It did for me. Thank you. Steve?
So letter B makes perfect sense to me. It's very direct and so forth. I'm trying to figure out what the what's going on in letter A. And what I'm wondering is it possible that what we would like is for districts to look at designing and implementing professional development in an online environment? because adding the word learning management system in there, some people use tools that aren't called a learning management system. And then I'm also curious about, we've kind of just tagged on and best practices for curriculum design. So is it designing and implementing professional development in an online environment, and almost a second statement that schools may need to consider professional development on the topic of online curriculum design. So, you know, no real concern with this, but just I wonder if it's kind of a wordsmithing activity.
Mm-hmm.
I say yes and to what Steve just said. I wonder if it's, so each district's going to choose, right, online or whatever their hybrid model is going to look like. So it's really professional development on the district's chosen, and best practices in curriculum design for the district's chosen hybrid model, or whatever, however it's going to look for them, so that there's instruction on how to adjust curricula from an in-classroom to a virtually instructor-led, or to an actual e-learning, or to whatever the blended is going to be, that the district chooses the model they're going to use for the hybrid, and the instruction around curriculum design and what we're trying to say in the LMS really is about how, like, professional development in their specific hybrid model.
Thank you.
So I think to further this a little bit, at times I think the more specific we are, the better. And the earlier districts figure this out, the better. Because I remember having to help a lot of the elderly teachers at my school figure out software like Zoom. I got volunteer hours, spending hours trying to show them what buttons to click. And I think the more, if we just use like one or two pieces of software and we figure this, what we're going to use, what districts are going to use early, that's the more time we have to help teachers figure out how to use the software and how to provide the best instruction.
Thank you, Ben. And I think that will come up in the last recommendation around sort of streamlining the management systems. Deli.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is professional development for just teachers, or is it professional development for all personnel, all staff in the school? Because I would certainly love to proactively train all staff to spot the signs of trauma and what to do if they spot it. You know, the janitor, the librarian, the person serving lunch, I think it's important for them all to know that. So I don't know if we need to change the title, PD for school personnel, or it feels like this is just for teachers, and I think it needs to be broader.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm open if others agree that the full recommendation title needs to change, or if it's more of that texture that the commissioner mentioned within the recommendations, that this is opened up to whoever the district deems it appropriate for. So if others have opinions or thoughts on that, I welcome it.
I think the parent piece is really important, making sure we have those professional development opportunities for our parents. I can speak for Manchester, especially with the technology and a lot of our learner management systems and platforms we use, we needed to go in and train our parents as well.
Mm-hmm. So then for task force members, does it seem like the overarching recommendation needs to be more specific while also being more inclusive? Or again, is it more kind of the texture within the recommendations that would give that clarity? Aaron.
Perhaps it's, again, using the language of consider professional development for your parents as a specific group, consider professional development for the students. I know when we were talking about transportation, one of the things that had come to mind was, well, we can work with our students on the first day when they come in talking about practices, but what about that first day before they've even come into school? What's that going to look like? How do they know what to be doing on the bus? Or for transportation. So maybe districts should be considering professional development for parents and students I wouldn't recommend blending them with the teacher, even if they're working with the same learning management system, as there's usually two different sides of the components from the tech side of things. But definitely having districts consider that, I think, would be very valuable.
Okay. And Erin, you just reminded me that I think in recommendation number 1, we talk about that communication plan for parents and the community more broadly. So it seems like that's also another connection that we might want to make to this, is around how that communication plan is being leveraged for maybe some of this professional development for parents.
Yeah, I could definitely foresee a decent professional development for parents covering communication, usage of the learning management system, facilitation of transportation, whether that's buses or carpooling, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. So moving on to our last one here, recommendation 10, which is around technology considerations for dynamic learning environments. So the first sub-recommendation is around ensuring student and staff privacy concerns are addressed and personally identifiable information is secure. Streamlining the number of management systems for students and parents. And then finally, implementing remote instruction best practices. So again, you'll see some red there. That includes revisions based on the feedback we received, as well as the comments from your task force colleagues around considerations. Welcome back, Erin.
So the red piece in A, the PII being secure, is a difficult one. Someone brought this to mind for me the other day when I was talking to them, but the idea that when that laptop leaves home, it's not even the idea that what is the student doing, but who else in that household has access to those computers, and what kind of monitoring can be done once it's left our doors, and what are we as a district responsible for, and what are we putting on the families and parents. I know when we were sending out computers, we had acceptable use policies that were agreed to as soon as they use the devices, but still, if you have a family that is planning on working remotely for the entire school year, how are you able to check back on that? How do you confirm that it was the student using the device inappropriately or someone else in the family, or is it all in one kind of thing? I struggle to give that consideration of or A as keeping all PII secure. What does that really mean? I don't know if that should be left up to the district or if that should be something that we should really determine, or someone completely different. I mean, that may not even be in our wheelhouse. What is considered secure? I think a lot of people have different ideas also as to what PII is, especially since House Bill 1612 came out. That kind of opened some people's eyes to what may or may not be considered PII. And I know that that'll come into conversation when districts find this recommendation. They're going to try and figure out how to manage that when they're talking about having computers sent out remotely. So unfortunately, I don't have a recommendation as to what we maybe change the language to, or but maybe that's something that we can toss around here and try and kind of massage out a little bit better.
Okay. I don't know, Commissioner, if I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or.
I think we added this because we got some feedback in the Google Doc. And so we were trying to be as responsive as we could to that. I mean, we may want to default to 1612. And for those of you on the call who don't know what 1612 is, that is that was the number of the bill that implemented some student privacy protocols and standards within the state of New Hampshire. So just trying to figure out and wanting to be as responsive, I think, as we can. I'm reading that first bullet, and it was, I think that's probably why you added the red.
Okay. Phil, did you want to add it?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the original draft of it, which after it says address, was actually really different. It's review online management systems to ensure student and staff privacy concerns are addressed. So I think this is just an attempt to discuss, like, okay, what are the privacy concerns we're talking about, which is that personally identifiable information, the PII. So I think the question is, just based on the last comment, like, is there an ongoing conversation as to what qualifies as PII within the state that is going to, like, so if it's a House bill going on, right, until it's been signed, it really doesn't impact this. So I guess the question is, do we as a state and as Department of Education have a set of, here is what PII is for schools, for students in
We
the
do.
state?
So we have standards. So
We
that
do.
bill is on, it's been passed and is part of the landscape right now. So to your point, do we need this because that's already part of the landscape in which we exist? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, or it's just, does this reference that the department's PII, like the department will say what PII is, right? So if the House bill moves on and gets passed and signed and it changes that, then it changes that, and then the department's gonna have to change it. But for now, I'd say if we have a definition as to what qualifies as PII, like maybe reference that in this.
So include that in the guidance.
Yeah, the data privacy standards that we have adopted as a state.
Right.
So.
Okay. How about any other feedback on this one or any of the ones that we've reviewed today or last week? Because I realize we're 1 minute over on our time. Yes, Aaron.
Really quick, the second bullet in B, districts are built upon systems and streamlining or shifts at all will take time. Sorry, the first bullet. Whew, long day. Provide examples of management systems. And when we're talking about the districts, that's why I got those tied together. We have an SAU, so when you have different schools, so we have the middle school, high school possibly using a different learning management system than our elementary school, but you have a parent that's working with students between both. Is the goal for us to still focus at that school level, or are we also trying to get SAUs to consider using the same, even though we kind of recommended sticking with what we already have for learning management system? Is this recommendation, I guess, is the piece in B recommended to an SAU as a whole, or are we thinking districts as the school themselves? So are we trying to streamline and have our middle school, high school using the same type of learning management system as our elementary schools, even though they're not really the same district?
I don't think I have an answer to that. I think I don't know, Commissioner, if you have a response or if that's just something that needs to be thought about more.
I mean, I don't know, because I wasn't part of the team who actually generated all of this recommendation, but I think the goal was to simplify the experience for the families, right? So you don't have, and so I'm going to guess anecdotally, just thinking of some of the stories that I heard of, one student having to interface, across maybe 4 different classes, but engaging 4 different systems. This one's on Zoom, this one's on Google, this one's not. And, so I think the simplification is the goal, and at what level that happens is probably going to be dependent upon a district.
Okay, yeah, and that's what I remember from the work group, what we were discussing, just simplifying it. Okay, great.
Hey, Phil.
Hey, tired of seeing my face, I'm sure. So I know you asked about the first 5 that we went over last week. So I know that we had a pretty robust 90-minute conversation plus last week about it. Are we going to get to actually see, like, this is great because we got to see what the edits were, so we can actually provide input into how it was edited based on feedback. Like, I know you took a lot of feedback, but I for one, have not actually seen what those edits are, and I wouldn't feel comfortable saying these are our recommendations without us seeing the edited version of those recommendations.
Yes, so we have captured that. We, if we thought we had time for today's conversation, we were going to sort of run through them like we did for these. So you can see sort of captured the same green with the revisions for 1 through 5. I think that it would make sense to share the 1 through 5 comments with the task force members, since we're asking you all to sign off, on these and would want to see this included. So we can certainly send that out to you either in an updated Word document or just in this slide deck. We can think about what's the best way to send that to you.
Saying I sign off or I agree to something when we haven't actually seen the language.
Yeah, that's completely fair. And I appreciate that.
But we
Yep.
actually have them.
So-
If you go, you'll see like the next slide is all of them updated, the first 5 updated. I just think that we've run out of time here now. So how does this group want us to push these back out to you? You know, we try to listen and get your feedback. What is the appropriate mechanism, knowing that time is of the essence? We can post these all to another Google Doc, send that out this afternoon, and allow people to weigh in on it that way. It's really up to the task force what you guys want to do with it. And I know Keith is on deck here too.
Yeah, yeah. If folks want to just put in the chat what your preferred approach is, Word document, the slide deck, or a Google Doc, where we're collecting your final thumbs up, that would be great. And Keith, if you have your thoughts.
So Frank, I give you kudos. I remember when this all started, I was reaching out to you and people were reaching out to me about what do we do with kids that don't have internet access. So have we addressed that? Have we shared information on how we're making sure that all students have internet and the hardware needed to be successful should they do remote learning?
So, I mean, I know that we're addressing it at the state on a couple of different levels, including, you know, the goal of investing another $50 million in internet connectivity, as well as applying for grants to support technology at the district. We don't have the capacity to actually buy, with any of these grants, to buy technology for students. That would not, we haven't found any grants that allow us to just do that. So that's happening more at the local district level. So we're trying to just facilitate that connectivity as much as we can.
Okay, so it looks like, I'm just reading through the chat very quickly, any of folks are generally fine with just sharing the slides or Google Docs, so we'll get that out to you today. And again, give you an opportunity to give any more feedback or get your final thumbs up on the recommendations.
Is it fair, Alan, for us to say, can we have like I know everybody's got a lot going on, but can we have like a 9 a.m. tomorrow? Because you and I have a deadline to the governor.
For that review, you're
Yes.
asking? Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure you weren't saying another meeting at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Another meeting, just, you know, everybody can give us feedback by then and we can work with.
That works for me. Again, feel free in the chat if that feels problematic to you, but that feels fine on my end or our end. But 9 a.m. Okay. Commissioner, would you like to close out?
Is everyone okay with that? I mean, just because, again, we've now got to then, you know, take this feedback and we're gonna, you know, finalize that. So if you can get us feedback, I mean, if you can get us tonight, yep, so Phil's okay, another couple of yeses, I'm okay. You know, I really appreciate, again, everybody's efforts in this, in terms of all of the thoughtfulness that went into these various recommendations that we're going to be making. We recognize that these are high-level recommendations, and so we are going to then go back through the notes of all the work groups and try to add texture. We've basically created through that crosswalk document continuity from the work groups, from the survey data, all the way through to each one of these recommendations. And I know that, you know, Ellen has tried to be very careful in terms of, you know, capturing the essence of what those groups have been working on. And so, again, high level, knowing that the districts are working on it, this will give them some framework and make sure that they've addressed all of the appropriate areas as we move towards September. And then as we begin to add texture to it to really generate some brainstorming and ideas that districts can use to actually go through kind of the implementation process. So again, I thank you for your attentiveness. I thank you for holding over in this call and just appreciate the work that you have put into this.
Thank you.
I agree. Thank you all.
Thanks so much.